Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Only Podcast. My name is Chris Vannini. I'm your host, as always. I'm joined here by the Only Color's managing editor, Joe Toohey, and we've got a pretty action-packed podcast here to talk about. A lot of stuff going on. NCAA basketball tournament about to kick off. If you guys like the podcast, make sure you subscribe on iTunes. And on Friday, after the game, MSU plays at 12:40 on True TV. After the game, we're going to be doing another live post-show podcast version / reaction thread. We did it after the Ohio State game. I think it worked out pretty well. I know it was really late, but I think it could work better at a better time. It's going to be me and Jeremy Warnamundi, who I used to work with at the State News and now writes for TOC. So that will be fun. We're going to talk about here tonight, whenever you're listening to this, we're going to talk about recap the Big Ten tournament real quick, preview Georgia, look at the East Regional with MSU and the rest of the bracket as a whole, as well as touch on hockey and Delton Williams' arrest. But first, we start off with basketball, and it's just me and Joe here because KJ still has not been able to get over the fashion in which the Spartans lost to the Wisconsin Badgers, in the Big Ten tournament final. Spartans led for much of the game, especially in the second half. Seemed to be in a good position to shoot some free throws for the win, but Denzel Valentine and Brandon Dawson each threw away a ball to the Badgers, would result in the game going to overtime, where the Spartans were shut out 11-0. So they fell short. And Tom Izzo said this week that was one of the tougher losses, and because of what that win would have meant with everything this team has gone through, what they've got, and to beat what would have been a one-seed win or lose in Wisconsin. But first, Joe, I guess, how are you doing, first of all?
This game you're talking about, was there a game on Sunday that I'm not remembering, or is it just that I blocked it out of my memory? I think it's probably the latter there.
Well, if you did, we're not going to have a lot to talk about here, I guess I'll just have
There's a fun game on Saturday. That was good.
Yeah, they beat Maryland, came back after an early 23-7 deficit, and Maryland finally lost a close game, which, more than anything, I enjoyed Maryland just losing a close game to anybody because of their record. I think it was 18-1 in games decided by 10 or fewer, 11-0 decided by 6 or fewer. Spartans won by, I think, 4.
Yeah, that was fun. That was fun for a lot of reasons. After we lost to Maryland at the game that was in College Park, I got into it on Twitter with some Terps fans, and I said that I hoped that we played them in the Big Ten tournament, and we did, and we got the win, and I was pretty excited about that. That's the second year in a row where MSU has lost in the regular season to a team twice, and then gotten revenge in the Big Ten tournament, which is pretty fun.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, in all seriousness, I think I've regained perspective on the whole tournament. I mean, as a whole, it was a very successful Big Ten tournament for Michigan State, right? I mean, it's everything you could have hoped for, basically. And it was odd because sort of expectations shifted within the game, and it's relatively rare for that to happen, right? Like, going into the Big Ten tournament, had you told me, hey, we're going to beat Ohio State and Maryland, and we're going to lose a close game to Wisconsin, I would have said, yes, absolutely, like, sign me up, where do I sign my name, right? But what happened during the game was that we played well enough that the expectation shifted from just, being competitive and having a little bit of a good run to winning it, right? And when a team does that, it's sort of a rare occasion. It's unusual for a team to get your hopes up from a level of expectation to a new level of expectation within the same 20 minutes. That's pretty amazing, and I'm trying to look on the bright side on that one myself.
Well, the 11-point deficit, or the 11-point lead that the Spartans took in the second half was tied for Wisconsin's largest deficit of the season. and it was pretty much right at that point when things kind of changed. Although they still could have held on. They weren't rebounding well in the first half, but they were making up for it by getting some favorable bounces and making a lot of shots. They were shooting 60% for much of the game against what's typically a very good Wisconsin offense, along with holding a Wisconsin offense that was the number one offense in the KenPom era, holding them, relatively in check. But then the Badgers really heated up from three, and then by the end of the game, I believe Wisconsin actually increased its offensive efficiency on the year to further move into that number one all-time offense spot. So, I mean, like you said, the expectations are based on, how things played out. That was a game that MSU, not only did they lead by 11, but Denzel Valentine got a defensive rebound or a loose ball rebound with only a few seconds left. Would have been fouled shooting. If he makes 2 free throws, MSU's up 4, and that might be the game. And the Spartans were 9 for 9 from the free throw line, which I think kind of got lost in how the game ended up. But that was far and away their best free throw shooting game of the year. You were gonna say something?
that was pretty good. The fact that Wisconsin shot 50% from deep was really troublesome. I really liked the adjustment.
I don't remember. I'm sorry. I don't remember what it was.
It was 50% they shot from three.
I'm going to look it up what it was in the second half, because they started off 2 for 7 or something like that.
Yeah, and I thought the adjustment that Izzo made going into the game, where he had Dawson guarding Kaminsky for the ability to sort of recover on the perimeter, I thought was pretty brilliant. In addition to the fact that Nigel Hayes has a better post game really than I think Kaminsky does, and so having a big on Nigel Hayes was also beneficial defensively. What I didn't understand was there's a 4-point lead right at the end of the first half, and they put Schilling back in, and they changed the defensive assignments so that Schilling is guarding Kaminsky, and of course Schilling loses him on the rotation, and Kaminsky buries a 3 to close the lead to 1. I thought that was a huge play at the time, and it turned out that it was just based on the fact that the game went into overtime. But I don't understand that switch at that time. But I guess more generally, I don't totally understand why this MSU defense has been so poor at rotating onto shooters in general. I mean, it seems like when ball screens occur, there's very little help from defenders that are not involved with one of the guys in the ball screen, right? So normally, in years past, as far as I remember, right, you'd have a rotating defender who would come over and help, and I haven't seen that happen basically at all in the last several weeks. And when you play a team that's got a pretty good 3-point shooting big, or multiple of them in the case of Wisconsin with Hayes, and Wisconsin had Dukin also went off, even though he's not usually as good of a 3-point shooter as he shot in that game. But Kaminsky, Hayes, and Dukin, and Decker to some extent too, you gotta rotate a little better on those ball screens, and continue to bite this team going forward.
Yeah, Dukin went 3 for 5 from deep. I think he was something like a 20% 3-point shooter. Hayes went 3 for 4. I think he was about a 35%, 38% 3-point shooter. So he had some good performances. The Badgers as a team went in the second half and overtime went 8 for 12 from deep. Some of those were wide open. Some of them were not. But like you said, Kaminsky had a couple of wide open ones where once they took Dawson off of Costello, it felt like they never really went back to it. And they started out the overtime with Schilling instead of Costello for I have no idea what reason. I don't know if I ever saw a reason, because I know the bracket came back out right over, so I might have gotten lost in the shuffle. But I mean, unless Costello was absolutely gassed, that didn't make really any sense, because Costello his defense on Kaminsky wasn't great, but it was far and away better than Schilling's was. And of course, I think Schilling gave up a couple buckets in the opening of that overtime, and the Spartans were pretty much out of it at that point. But
yeah, I agree with that completely. I mean, Costello Costello is just basically a superior player to Schilling in nearly every way. I mean, he's a better rebounder. He's got a better feel for making the extra pass at times. He doesn't turn the ball over as much, and he doesn't foul as often. I don't. I mean, I understand why Izzo has had Schilling start in halves, right, at the beginning of the game and at the beginning of the second half. But and especially considering how well Costello has played in overtimes during the season, I would hope that he would have played a little more in that overtime. But I mean, ultimately, I think that the team was just sort of out of sorts once Wisconsin tied the game up and sent it into OT, and Dawson missed that potential buzzer beater.
Yeah, that's another one. That was inches. I mean, not closer than that. It got a couple of bounces up there and just fell off. And if that happens, people don't remember Valentine throwing the ball away or Dawson throwing the ball away. It's just kind of, if they could have gotten a couple bounces or two, if they got the call about I think it was Gosser stepping out right before Valentine threw it away. If they had just gotten one, break, one or two breaks down at the end, that probably would have been enough to hold them on. But it was another example of this team unable to close, and this time wasn't because of free throw shooting. I mean, they didn't miss any. It didn't come down to that. It was just defensively they could not make the stops when they needed to, and then in overtime they couldn't do much of anything. And
I mean, there's a couple other things that happened in there too. I hate to point the finger at officials, but not only was the step out of bounds by Gosser not called, there was also a major free throw disparity, and that became an issue on that final possession where Dawson missed that potential buzzer beater because Wisconsin smartly had a bunch of fouls to give, and then gave all those fouls after
they didn't get to give all of them.
Right.
Dawson, yeah.
But I thought that there were a lot of potential fouls that occurred during the course of that half that weren't called, where now instead of having to get a shot off with 4 seconds, maybe you've got your full 8 seconds or whatever that's left. Although I also didn't understand why Denzel Valentine took as much time as he did getting the ball over half court and taking the timeout. I mean, that possession started with, I think, about 14 or 15 seconds left, and then
they might have been better not. I mean, looking back, they might have been better not taking out that timeout, because then Bo Ryan was able to clearly get the, okay, we've got a bunch of fouls to give mode.
Right.
And MSU didn't really seem to have a plan. I mean, it wasn't executed on how to deal with it. There was I think it was Valentine or might have gotten fouled on the last foul that they gave, and it was almost a shooting foul, and it was like MSU was expecting he was expecting to get fouled, and then they didn't give it, and then they tried to, and then the shot was kind of late. I mean, I made a point during the game that wasn't a shooting foul, but there was I think a Nigel Hayes play that was ruled a shooting foul shortly earlier. But Wisconsin, they never foul ever. They're number one. Well, I mean that. I mean, they're number one every year in preventing opponents from getting to the free throw line. I think they had only been committed 12 fouls in the first 2 games total. And they had 11 in this one, but a number of those were like you said at the end where they were trying to give it up. I didn't think officiating really had much to do with anything. I mean, MSU only had 17 fouls for the game, which was pretty low for them. No one was really in trouble. They generally stayed out of it, which I thought was good. But the Gosser miss on stepping out, I mean, that's pretty bad. The ref was clearly right there.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you're looking for on a play like that. Had Valentine, and it wasn't a dead ball, so I don't think they could review it, or I think that MSU would have to request to review it. No one seemed to really know what the rule was on that. Had Valentine been fouled, there would have been no real reason to review it. I don't know if they would have, because MSU had the ball. It was kind of a weird ending, and it was an unfortunate one for MSU. But as a whole, you look at the weekend, and I think it's pretty safe to say that this team is heading into the NCAA tournament playing its best basketball of the year, and they go into the East Regional. They'll play in Charlotte on Friday at 12:40 Eastern on True TV against the number 10 seeded Georgia Bulldogs, who come into the game 21-11, and when you look at their KenPom profile, nothing really stands out about them. They're I think potentially a little bit underseeded. They're ranked number 35 in KenPom. The only thing that stands out is their defense is better than their offense. They're number 26 overall in adjusted defensive efficiency, and they get to the free throw line a lot. Number 5 in the country at getting to the line. However, they're not all that great at the free throw line. They probably were the closest to beating Kentucky as anybody has been this year. They lost by 6 at home earlier this month when they were leading late. KenPom predicts only a 2-point MSU win, giving the Spartans a 60% chance. So I think this is a lot more of an even matchup on paper maybe than people might realize. But another thing is that this MSU team has been wildly inconsistent, and although they're up to what are they up to 17 in KenPom, if the team that played Wisconsin came to play, you'd have to like their chances. If it was a team that lost to Minnesota, who knows? So, I mean, when you're looking at this game, when this matchup was first made and you kind of looked at the Bulldogs, Joe, what stuck out to you? How are you looking at this game?
So there are a couple interesting things, and I did a little Q&A with Dog Sports, which is our sister site.
Oh, good.
For Georgia, it's up on theonlycolors.com right now.
Read it.
But they had some interesting things. So yeah, the getting to the line thing stuck out to me. And the answer I got from them about that was that it's a little bit of both. So there's a few players who have sort of the license to drive at will. Charles Mann is top 10 in the country in terms of free throw rate for individuals, which is pretty impressive. And
number 42nd in fouls drawn, so he gets fouled a lot.
Yeah, he is a little sloppy with the ball, and that's consistent with what Dog Sports was saying, that he can be out of control, and it sort of just depends on how the refs end up calling some of those, right? Where if he's a little out of control, barreling towards the paint, and they bail him out with a call, he gets some of those, and other times those end up being turnovers. So it'll be really interesting to see how this MSU team, which is pretty foul prone, and not just the bigs either. Denzel Valentine has gotten into foul trouble at times as well, and I assume that he's the guy who's going to draw the assignment on Charles Mann just based on the size, right?
Yeah, 6'5", 215 is what Mann is, so he's he's a bigger guy.
So that's going to be a really interesting matchup to watch, because if Valentine, and we saw this very briefly against Wisconsin, but if there's times when Trice and Valentine aren't on the floor, the MSU offense becomes nearly unwatchable and equally struggle, however you want to say that, but they really struggle in half court without either one of those guys on the floor, so that'll be important. The other interesting thing is that the rotation for Georgia has not really ever gotten settled because of injuries. So Kenny Gaines is probably going to play, almost certainly going to play, but might be a little limited.
It appears he's gotten some shots up this week, I think, or was going to. The status, you'd imagine he'd play, but I think it's pretty clear that he at least won't be 100%. He is their number 2 scorer at 11.6 points per game, and he takes a lot of shots from behind the 3-point arc, but he shoots about 36%.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting, because they only have it's 6 guys who have played more than 40% of available minutes, which is a pretty low number. I mean, that ends up being something like 15 minutes a game or something along those lines, right? So, but they've got 11 guys who have played more than 10% of minutes, so they haven't really ever settled into a rotation. So it'll be really interesting to see how short that bench is for Georgia. I think that they'll probably go with a pretty short bench.
I would imagine,
assuming that they don't get into foul trouble. So that's something where I think MSU has a little bit of an advantage. With the subs sort of coming into their own, Alvin Ellis and Marvin Clark both sort of finding their roles and being able to play a little bit. So that could be helpful if Alvin Ellis can come in and guard a guy like Charles Mann for some stretches and give some fouls and keep Valentine in the game for the vast majority. That rotational thing will be really interesting. The other thing is that they don't have any starters over 6'8", although I don't think that will matter too much. I mean, their 6'8" guys guarding Schilling or Costello should be pretty able to do that. And they've got some guys who have pretty good block rates. Former MSU recruit Yante Motten, I think is how you pronounce it.
I don't know how to pronounce it. Yeah.
The freshman is number 55 in the country in terms of block percentage. So I think that they'll be able to guard in the post pretty well. I'm hoping that the offense doesn't attempt to operate through Brandon Dawson in the post as sometimes Izzo has done. But yeah, they've got some length on the perimeter. They play a 6'7" guy at the 3. Charles Mann is 6'5", so they do start a guy who's 5'10", but.
Yeah, it's a team that they're decent at defensive rebounding, but like you said, because of that lack of a big guy, it's an offense where you'd prefer Dawson being in a position to grab an offensive rebound as opposed to the guy taking the shots. Georgia opened the year against Georgia Tech and lost to former MSU assistant Brian Gregory, who looks like told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that he has given Izzo everything he's got on how to beat the Bulldogs. I mean, that was the first game of the year. The team's probably a lot different now, but
yeah, Brian Gregory has a 4-0 record against Georgia at Georgia Tech, too.
Oh, there you go. Good note.
And Georgia also played Minnesota this year and lost on a neutral court, so that's an interesting result. Although I think Minnesota might have been a little bit of a better team in the non-conference than they ended up being in the Big Ten season.
Yeah, it's hard to know what these teams were in November and what they are now. But it looks like, defense is kind of where Georgia makes its living. Number 15 in effective field goal defense, number 25 in two-point defense, and part of that is because of the block rate, which is pretty good for them. There's nothing that really stands out that this team, it's not like a team that, loves to run or shoots a lot of threes like some recent MSU openers have had. It's just kind of a team, and it kind of feels like a game that's going to come down to who simply plays their game better. I know a lot of MSU fans are overlooking this game, and if anything, this season should have you taking every game very seriously. It's this team lost to Minnesota at home not too long ago. They lost to Illinois at home. They lost to Texas Southern at home. So anything's possible. And then you look at Ken Pom only predicting a 2-point win for MSU, 60% chance. So it's pretty close to a toss-up. And you have to like MSU's how they've been playing recently. But MSU's had some games against Louisville a couple years ago, against Duke, where they just get completely flat out cold from shooting, and it just dooms them. And this is a team that has had to rely on a lot of jump shooting, and if it happens to be one of those games where just simply nothing falls, you can very easily see the Spartans falling out, or if they've got a lead late and they got to hit free throws to make them. Nothing has ever been certain with this team. PredictMachine.com. I was listening to their guy today on Colin Coward. He said MSU was the second most underseeded team in the tournament. And looking ahead to Virginia, if Justin Anderson of Virginia is not the same player he was, it would probably have MSU over Virginia in the game. So as we kind of branch out and look at this region, it's a region that when I was putting together my bracket, I could see 6 different teams winning this region. I could see number 1 Villanova, number 2 Virginia, even number 3 Oklahoma, number 4 Louisville, MSU. Just a lot of teams here that could do a lot of things. What did you think of MSU's draw? If the Spartans win, you assume they're playing Virginia in the next round, and they beat the Cavaliers last year in a slow, ugly affair, but it's a type of offense that MSU is used to, both from last year and from recently playing Wisconsin. So how do you kind of look at this draw, look at this region?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think Virginia is the toughest 2 seed, or you could make a very good argument. I mean, it's them or
I think they were right. I think they were the highest 2 seed in the
yeah.
league, so.
And they lost 2 games during the regular season, and then they lost in the conference tournament as well. I mean, that Virginia team's really tough, and
beating
them would be difficult. The good news is that they play a very similar style to Wisconsin,
right.
And MSU, just had a pretty good game against Wisconsin. So I think that's part of what happened in the tournament last year as well, is just being pretty well prepared, honestly, to play a team of that style. The other thing, just from a numbers perspective, that's positive with Virginia is that they play so slow that you would assume on a per possession basis, if Virginia has an advantage over MSU, which is probably true, they would want to play a larger number of possessions because it would be more likely for that advantage to play out. So the fact that they play slow makes them a better candidate for an upset. So it does help in that regard. If I was to pick a 2 seed, that I would much rather play Kansas or even Gonzaga than Virginia.
Absolutely.
But in terms of how that could have gone, it could be worse.
But I mean, if there's any 7 seed that you could see beating Virginia, it would be MSU too.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I guess, and maybe Wichita State, they're pretty good. They might have been the most underseeded team. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it makes me mad that Providence is the 6th seed and Xavier got a 6th seed, but we can talk about that later. Oklahoma.
Right. That was a big thing. But on the other hand, I could easily see, if MSU beats Georgia, I could easily see the MSU Virginia winner winning the region. Although it's not actually my pick, but I think that Sweet 16 draw for either team is going to be much more favorable than you'd find in a lot of other places too. So it's kind of, big reward, big loss.
Yeah, high risk, high reward. I think Oklahoma, I don't know what to make of. I guess I didn't watch enough Big 12 basketball this season.
I did not either. And then everybody saying the Big 12 is the best conference this year. I don't dispute it because I know the Big 10 really was not good at all. But this is a year that, as we kind of look at this whole region, it felt like there were like maybe 4, 5, 6 teams all year that just felt like they were head and shoulders above everybody else. The drop, and you look at the 3 seeds in this tournament, and Baylor, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, who people like, but I haven't liked. Once you kind of get into the 2 seeds, it seems to be a real sharp drop off in quality of teams. And I have, in my Final Four, I actually have the 1 seeds, and I didn't even, I always end up with the 1 seeds on first try, and it's not even how I mean to do it, but it just felt like those 4 teams, especially, along with Virginia, along with Arizona, really kind of felt head and shoulders above the rest of the country. And you got Virginia with 3 losses, Villanova with 2 losses, Kentucky with no losses. Just a couple of teams that kind of felt above everybody else. How's your bracket look? What do you think of kind of the tournament as a whole and how deep it is or isn't?
Yeah, going off what you just said there, I mean, if you're thinking, you're saying, and I agree with you, there's probably 6, maybe 7 if you count Gonzaga, really, really good teams that you would rather not play, and so MSU ends up in the region that's got 2 of them, and so that's unlucky to some degree at a high level. But I think you're right. I mean, it's a top-heavy season in college basketball, and that's something that Nate Silver at 538, who I think does the best set of projections, says as well. Like, even if you removed Kentucky, it would be a top-heavy year.
Right.
And so adding, obviously with Kentucky in there makes it that much more interesting. I tried to pick a Big 12 team to be in the Final Four just because they were the best conference this season, and I think that teams end up benefiting quite a bit from that level of competition over the course of the year. And I think so my Final Four ended up being Kentucky, Virginia, um, actually Arizona, and then Iowa State. So I thought Wisconsin gets kind of a rough draw because I think North Carolina is a very strong 4 seed, and I think that North Carolina has sort of the right combination of athletes to give them some trouble.
Right.
And I like Arizona in that bracket. I picked Iowa State just because I think they get the easiest draw of any of those Big 12 teams. And I just really like that Virginia team. I mean, I think that they just play really well, and
I do too. That was a real tough draw for MSU. I mean,
Yeah.
but if they're able, they've proven that they beat Virginia a year ago when they were a 1 seed. So if anybody, if there's anybody you would pick over them, it would be MSU. And I thought the seedings too. I was surprised Virginia got a 2 seed. I kind of thought Duke ended up with the number 2-1 seed. I kind of felt like Virginia maybe was a little more deserving of that based on the year. I don't know. It was kind of, Virginia. Villanova only had 2 losses. I think they were the last 1 seed, and nobody really watched the Big East this year because they're not on ESPN anymore. But
right. Yeah.
The seedings are so weird because you've got 7 seeds in Wichita State and Michigan State who are both top 17 in KenPom, and there's the same amount of 7 seeds as there are 4 seeds in the top 17. Maryland ended up a 4 seed. I know based on what they did that was fair, but they've been a team that's been pretty lucky. Like I said, once you get down to the 3 seeds, it just really feels like anything can happen. Even some of these 2 seeds, and there's so many high seeds that I just don't trust based on just recent history. I don't trust Notre Dame. I don't trust Gonzaga. I don't trust Villanova. I usually don't trust Wisconsin. I don't trust.
I agree with that. I don't trust Maryland.
I don't trust Maryland at 4. I don't trust Georgetown at 4. I don't trust Baylor at 3. There's just so many, it just really feels like there's only 4 to 6 teams that have a chance to win it, or that even have a remote chance of winning it. I mean, you've already said you said you have Virginia in your Final Four, so
yep.
I assume you have MSU beating Georgia and losing to Virginia.
Yeah, I just figure even if I picked MSU to go further than that, it's just a relatively low percentage play. So I'm trying. It's a what's the right word for it? I mean, game theory type of selection. It's hard for me to get too excited about a whole bunch of upsets, but
right. I think there's going to be a lot of upsets, but I don't think there's anything you can really pick. Generally, I don't really care about my bracket after I pick things, but then I just always root for the upsets, because if you're not rooting for an upset because of your bracket, that just kind of feel like always takes the fun out of it. So I do it, then I check to see how I did at the end, and if it was good, it was good. If it wasn't, it wasn't. But this year feels just really wide open. You've got the Eastern Washington coach guaranteeing a victory over Georgetown, which I think a lot of people might have been picking anyway. Stephen F. Austin's a popular 12. Buffalo's a popular 12. I want to trust Iowa at 7 there with Gonzaga as their number 2. I actually have them going to the Sweet 16 and losing to Iowa State.
That would be a lot of fun. I'm really rooting for the Iowa State-Iowa Sweet 16 matchup,
just for
because I would
Twitter's
just love
sake.
to see that. Oh,
just
yeah.
For Twitter's sake, that'd be so much fun. But yeah, my Final Four is the 4-1 seeds. I actually have MSU in the Elite 8, losing to Villanova, but I could easily, like I said, see Virginia filling that spot, making the Final Four. If it's MSU Virginia, that's probably the best. Well, I guess Wichita Kansas would be a good one, but that might be the most interesting second round game. But Spartans got Georgia first, although they will certainly prepare a little bit for Virginia. As Izzo always says, if the players win the first game for him, he'll win the second game for them, and it's almost always been the case. The only time Izzo's lost on the second game of a weekend is to a number 1 seed or to the eventual national champion, and that turned out to be, that caveat was UConn last year. But last year's tournament was a championship game was between a 7 and an 8 seed. So, anything can happen. It feels like a top-heavy year, but there's a reason the NCAA tournament is so much fun because anything can happen.
Right, and if you get past Virginia, right, things can open up.
If you get past Virginia, anything's possible.
Right, because who knows, even Villanova, which is probably, which appears by 538 has the second best chance of winning the whole tournament, has a 70% chance of getting to the Elite Eight. So, I mean, that's a good chance of getting to the Elite Eight, but there's also a 30% chance there that, a team other than Villanova would be in that spot.
They could lose to NC State. They could lose to Northern Iowa. They could lose to Louisville. They could lose to LSU. I mean, it's just they're a team that They're a team that I typically haven't trusted. They've been prone to upsets, which is just kind of how they play. I know they beat up on a lot of bad teams this year, but the advanced statistics still hold them in high regard. So you've got MSU in the second round losing to Virginia. I've got them in the Elite Eight losing to Villanova. Anything can happen. That's why it's so much fun. Is there a TOC bracket tournament this year? I know we already started the Pick 16. Is there an actual bracket one?
I figured we'd just go with the Pick 16. I think people have enough other brackets.
Yeah, I gotta do all those stuff tonight. Actually, after we wrap this up, I gotta go submit all mine. I make one bracket and then I just submit it everywhere.
Yeah, I agree. It's way too much work to keep track of everything. Speaking to what you're talking about with what you root for in the tournament, I end up with 12 different thoughts on who to root for. I want to root for things that open up MSU's bracket first and foremost, basically. I'll root for Belmont over Virginia, not only for the upset, but also just because it would make the draw a lot easier. So anything that benefits MSU's draw, I try to root for the Big Ten because I like to see Big Ten teams win.
Yeah, I think I generally root for the Big Ten.
I try, and then upsets, and then my bracket. So it's it ends up, there can end up being games where if I've picked, I picked Iowa over Davidson, right? But I'd kind of like to see Davidson win because that's kind of a fun upset. But then I also want to root for the Big Ten, and I also want my bracket to do well. And it's
I just root for close games.
Yeah,
that'll come down to the end. And wishing Gus Johnson was still working for CBS.
And
it's a shame.
Hoping that there aren't too many MSU games on True TV because that's kind of brutal.
Right. I think my mom's actually coming over to my place to watch the game because they don't get True TV.
Yeah, I don't get it at home. The good news is that I'll actually be at work during the game, and we've blocked off some time to find a conference room and watch it. So
well, there you go.
Does the NCAA still do the free streaming of all the games? They should.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, you can get it on your phone. It's pretty good on your phone too. It's good quality and everything. I've done a couple times on there. I always have to re-download the app about the day before every time. Pretty good though. You can also listen to the radio calls, I think, too. And also you can do it on the computer, obviously. So I got all the 1 seeds. You got a couple of mixes up in there. Should be a fun tournament. Anything can happen with this MSU team. I think that's for sure. I could see them losing to Georgia. I could see them making the Final Four. It's one of those years where they're coming into the tournament playing their best basketball. Can they get past the Wisconsin loss? Can they make shots? Can they make free throws? Can they consistently perform at a level at which we have seen them perform at times? And that'll be the biggest question. I think the Georgia game simply just comes down to who plays their game better. I don't think there's anything specific style, schematic-wise, that you have to change, that you have to adapt for.
I would say Georgia's ability to get to the line will require a slight schematic change, right? I don't think that MSU
MSU switches so much on I don't know how much Georgia uses screens, but they switch so much, and MSU's defense is always just going to be the simple man-to-man with a lot of switches. I think they simply have to play a little bit harder and maybe a little bit more physical without fouling and kind of move your feet quickly. But I don't think it's not a style of offense like Wisconsin that you have to rapidly prepare for. I think you just simply need to move your feet and prevent those drives.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to watch, and also like early on how the refs call that game will dictate quite a bit.
If this is a game where Valentine's got 2 fouls in 15 minutes, that would spell, I think, very bad news for MSU.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So we'll see what happens with that. Before we wrap up here, we'll also touch on hockey. Michigan State hockey. They split the season series, the weekend series, with Michigan, with the Wolverines winning at Munn and the Spartans winning at Yost, which rarely ever happens in this rivalry. It's typically been dominated by the home teams, and these are the first 2 home games of the year. So what happened was with MSU's win on Sunday, they had temporarily moved into a first place in the Big Ten. They needed a Minnesota loss to at least get a share of the title. But the Gophers won, took the number 1 seed. So MSU is the number 2 seed in the Big Ten tournament. They will play Friday at about 8 p.m. at the Joe against the winner of Wisconsin and Michigan, meaning it's going to be Michigan. So that I bought tickets to that today, so I'm actually going to be going to that pretty cheap since it's in the middle of the NCAA basketball tournament. So that should be interesting. If Spartans win 2 games, they win the semifinal game, win the championship game, they will go to the NCAA tournament. It's very likely the Big Ten's only going to be a 1-team bid, so whoever wins this tournament will likely get that bid. So be something to watch for. Watch for Jeremy's hockey previews. He always does good stuff. Make sure you check those out. And we'll wrap this up with some football, as running back Delton Williams was arrested in a road rage incident and was allegedly brandishing a firearm. It's his second arrest in 3 years, although the other one did not come at MSU. When he was in high school in 2012 in the summer, he was arrested on a drug charge. That was later dropped the charges were dropped a month later. And it was something that Williams cited in why he chose MSU. One of the reasons is because they stuck by him, I guess, when he was arrested in high school. Penn State backed out. So for him to get arrested again is obviously not a good look. I don't know the situation of what happened. Can't speculate on that. But he has been suspended from all football-related activities indefinitely, which was a pretty sternly worded message from D'Antonio on the release. Who knows what exactly that's going to amount to if he comes back? I don't know. My guess is he will remain on the team, but I don't know all the circumstances behind everything, so I never want to say too much into that. And also McGarrett Kings was also, I know we talked about, recently arrested for a second time for resisting arrest and kicking a parking truck. Kind of a weird situation. But when you look at the situation, Joe, you got any thoughts on it?
Yeah, it sucks. It really sucks for Delton. It sounds like he's a guy who's had some trouble in the past and hasn't quite been able to leave that behind. Brandishing a firearm, if that's really happened, is really serious. That's pretty aggressive and pretty concerning. The impact for the team, I think, with Delton Williams potentially being suspended, I think is a little less severe than King's, just because
really? I think the opposite.
I think running back is just a position where guys can step in and take over pretty quickly, and we saw that in a totally different situation, right? But in 2010, leading rusher in 2009 was Larry Caper. 2010, Baker and Le'Veon Bell were the basically the only guys getting carries. So I think running back's just a little easier, and there were going to be a lot of guys vying for time anyways, right? You've got Gerald Holmes, you've got Madre London, you've got L.J. Scott. There's just a lot of guys. Gerald Owens, right? There's just a lot of guys who could potentially take over,
but it's nobody who's done anything. With R.J. Sheldon in the slot, I believe our friend Brymac from M Gold, I believe he noted that the leading returning rusher, from a running back position would have been Lawrence Thomas with 1 carry for 1 yard, and he's obviously not a running back anymore. So you're going to have a lot of inexperienced guys getting the carries this year.
But I think that
in the
experience
spring,
is less important at running back than at receiver, where
I think
you've
if you
got to
had
have some.
but there's like no experience. Like with receiver, you've got some guys who have played. Like there's nobody who's played a snap or taken. I don't even know if taken a carry behind Delton Williams. But we'll see what the spring opens on March 24th. We'll see what D'Antonio has to say about that when that starts. I mean, brandishing a firearm on campus. I don't know honestly why you need a gun in East Lansing. Charlie Strong has a no guns policy at Texas, and Brett Bielema made a comment that he basically said, "Duh, like why that? Obviously, there's no guns." And I don't know if Mark D'Antonio knew Delton Williams had a firearm or not. Like I said, I don't want to look into that. But it's a situation where if it's road rage incident, pretty bad stuff could have happened. Obviously, it didn't, but only they know exactly what happened and why. But that's a pretty serious charge.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think more serious than the second McGarrett King's arrest, considering it was mostly kicking a parking truck and kind of a resisting arrest. But it is a potentially violent situation. So we'll see what happens. Spring camp opens on March 24th. We'll see where that goes from there. But the NCAA tournament again starts Thursday. You may have already started by the time you listen to this. But if you like the podcast, subscribe on iTunes. Check out theonlycolors.com for a bunch of great preview stuff. We got a lot of great stuff this week, and we'll have great stuff over the weekend. And again, if you want to jump on, participate in the live comments section for the post-game show, me and Jeremy Warren and Monday are going to try to do that. Should be a lot of fun after the MSU-Georgia game, which, again, 12:40, True TV. Should be interesting. So that's it from me. Joe, you got anything?
Nope, I'm good. I'm excited for Friday.
All righty. Take care, everybody. See you.
See ya.